If you're looking for clear pro-life thinking, cutting-edge apologetics, and a fresh approach to abortion dialogue, you've come to the right place. This is the Equipped for Life podcast.
Okay, so joining the Equipped for Life podcast today is a very special guest, a good friend of mine. She is a Catholic wife and homeschooling mother of 4. She became pro-life during her first pregnancy after seeing multiple ultrasounds of her very alive son beginning at 13 weeks. I like how your son was very alive. It was like he was extra alive. Motivated by the atrocities unveiled by the Center for Medical Progress expose in the summer of 2015, Ali began a grassroots movement to infuse pro-life apologetics, into her dormant local pro-life community through book studies, conferences, and speaker series. In 2018, she took over her local Right to Life affiliate, leading multiple grassroots campaigns against anti-life legislation at the state level and advocating for local pregnancy centers who face political discrimination. Ali currently serves the pro-life movement in Maryland on a completely voluntary basis. And on a personal note, Ali Rak is a good friend of mine. She's opened her house up. I've literally stayed there multiple times when I'm around DC. So we've got to hang out a lot with her kids, with her husband. You guys are just all awesome and great kind of supporters of ERI. And we first got to meet at a really, really cool event you set up. And actually, this might not be the first time. Maybe it's the second time. I'm thinking of the David Bereit event. That always just stands out in my head.
That was after,
That was after. What did we do the first time? How did we get together the first time?
Okay, so this is kind of part, I think, of the reason why you want to interview me, but I always have my eye on good opportunities to learn from and get close to experts
oh, nice.
in what I'm trying to get good at. And so I actually, when I began my journey, into actually leading something, I started a pro-life apologetics conference down here with Trent Horn. Trent Horn
was our
first. And so Trent, we had done almost a year-long book study with Persuasive Pro-Life. We started multiple book studies around the area, and we brought Trent in for like a morning seminar type of workshop. And in the afternoon, we did legislative stuff. And it was while I was preparing for that event, I was trying to find examples of Trent doing some of the techniques from his book.
Right.
I was specifically looking for a trot out the toddler, I think. And when I was Googling around, I found Life Report. And so I found Trent on Life Report, and I was like, and then I saw 200 episodes, so I would like binge listen to the Life
You were
Report
one of
episodes.
those.
Yes. While I was doing chores or, I think it was right before vacation, about a month before the conference itself. I remember packing and just like episode after episode after episode. Yeah. So basically before we did the conference, I was already in my mind thinking, we'll have to have this guy down. We'll have to have Josh down for an event or something like that. So, then, you go to joshbrahm.com, which is what you reference on Life Report all the time, and it leads to ERI. So
now it does.
Yes, now it does. Now it does. Right. And that's how I found ERI and saw that you had left Fresno and you had started ERI. So of course, binging all the articles and things like that. So then I saw when your course was coming out, I started following Facebook. And when it launched, I think as an incentive, you were offering like 30-minute phone calls for being on a webinar.
Yes.
So I watched the webinar, I got my 30-minute phone call, and that was when we were talking. You were like, I'm coming down to, you said something like, would you be open to hosting us if we're in the area? And I was like, yeah, actually, I put myself on that list already. And I think I heard you like shuffling some papers, and you're like, wait a second. And I think we talked in October, and you're like, actually, I'm going to be down there next month. Can you host me next month? So that's how.
As long as we're inviting ourselves over.
Right. So that's how it got started. Yes, I've hosted you twice. I think once also solo. You came. I was on vacation, used my house.
That's right. That's true. You really trust me.
But yeah, that was very early on in my kind of journey.
Early on, at this point, you've already read a pro-life book and you're leading studies through it. You've listened to, I don't know how many hundreds of pro-life podcasts.
Yes, right.
early on for you is
Yes.
like halfway through most people's pro-life journeys.
Right. And so I do hope to someday kind of figure out a way for people to get to where I did without with the quickest path,
Right.
But I did find that pro-life apologetics was, I think, the key. And we've talked about this, where like people get into the movement in different ways: pregnancy centers, apologetics, whatever I forget the other ones, but sidewalk counseling. So, and they usually think that that's the most effective, and so they stay there. But that wasn't me. I was like, what do we have to do to end abortion?
Yeah.
But the reason that pro-life apologetics appealed to me was that I was pro-choice for a long time. Active, well, I guess, I mean, we're kind of, I'm going to get at some point to the point where I'm been pro-life longer than pro-choice, but throughout college, high school and college, I was very pro-choice. I ran a women's center at my college, and I was allowed to have any political opinions that I wanted, except that I had to be pro-choice. That was a prerequisite of the job. So I actually, it was a co-director position. I was a Democrat at the time, pro-choice, and my co-director was Republican, pro-choice. We had to have that that was like a fundamental value we had to hold. And so it was very, very pro-choice.
Yeah.
I was a political science major, and I took a women's studies course, Women in Politics. And I was told ahead of time, but I didn't care because I liked the issue, but that this particular professor always made all of her courses into, an abortion course. So it was, the pro-life people at my college, and it was a more conservative college at the time, felt very silenced by this professor. And of course, I couldn't see that now, but she definitely, I think could have been handled if some of the pro-life people that I knew had better arguments. So that was always my thing. Nobody ever talked to me in a persuasive way. So I joke, I joke now about it, but I was 100% serious. I became pro-life because of biology, seeing my son on the ultrasound, feeling him move, and imagining what kind of procedure would have to end his life. Absolutely shook me to the core. But my husband was always pro-life, very actively pro-life. His mom was like a pro-life leader in her little town, And so we were very political. We loved to argue about politics, but I told him that issue was off the table. So the only thing he ever prayed for himself was that I would be pro-life one day. So, it happened pretty quick. We got pregnant right after the wedding. We had some struggles with that pregnancy early on. That's why I had so many ultrasounds and so early, is they thought something was wrong with him. So there was that's where I actually see the hand of God in my life. I had to go through that to really pay attention. But when I read Persuasive Pro-Life, I remember after a couple of chapters saying to my husband, honey, did you know that you can argue against abortion because the babies are human beings? And he was so sweet. He was like, yes, that's actually what it's all about.
It's not all religion. It's not just a religious thing.
Right. I remember, here's a specific example of that class that I was in. I think it was my junior year. I remember there was a senior in the class, and she was a very popular sorority sister, pretty infamous on the campus. And it was a small class. We were in a small class. And this pro-life young woman, getting very fired up. I think she was a year or two younger than me, about abortion. And, and she was using religious arguments. And this girl, this senior, goes, don't you think it's better to take care of it when it's this big? It's just, you could just get rid of it. And it was that sent the other young woman into a fit of rage. But, if she had just said something like, well, what is it? What is that? You know what I mean? The tide of the conversation could have turned really, I think really quickly. So that's why I was really fascinated by pro-life apologetics, and especially, Trent's philosophies, using the Socratic dialogues and things like that. And I have friends who've gone through that book, who've gone through the ERA course, who say that they actually apply that in other arguments in their life too. So it's not just that ERI and pro-life apologetics helps you become a better pro-life advocate. It just makes you a better conversationalist overall. Yes. So Yeah.
I've definitely found that. Okay, so I've got so many things I want to ask you, but
Okay.
I just want to highlight for people, if you want to hear audio from a really cool event that Ali ran, I kind of referenced this earlier. We ended up doing, so it was your second,
It was
after
our
you had
second.
Trent, you did
Yep.
a second apologetics thing
Yep.
where you wanted to have two people. And so you had me and David Bereit, like my best friend in the world in the pro-life movement.
He's
my favorite person.
Listen, I love you, Josh, but David is definitely
I don't blame
my
you.
top guy.
He's got to be the top guy. He's just he's just the best guy.
He's so fantastic.
Yeah, he is. So we recorded the audio of that event. That is still in our ERI podcast feed, and it's really fun to listen to because I thought it was so brilliant how you put that event together, because you didn't put like two apologists there. You put two people that kind of brought different things. I cannot bring what David brings to an event. He's a very unique, awesome, get off the couch, go do stuff. Let me tell you how we did this and how we did this and how you're going to have a 3x multiplier effect in your community, like that kind of thing. Yes. And I'm like, here's the best arguments, you know, but that kind of made it really cool. And then we had like a panel thing afterward. It was so fun. So I really enjoyed that. So I just realized you majored in poli-sci, which probably explains why you're so good at what I wanted to talk to you about today. Because so here's the reason Ali's here is, as I've gotten to know you and as we've had long conversations in your kitchen, or you and me and Rachel hung out the last time we were up in DC, and as you're just talking about the advocacy work that you do locally, where you've gone beyond just doing apologetics, but you're also doing a lot of like you're a community organizer, and you're making sure everyone knows what they need to do because we've got to call this politician this week, and all these things that are so in a different area than what I know anything about. It's like one of the areas of pro-life movement where I'm so not an expert at all. And I'm so glad there's people like you doing it. But as we listen to you specifically talk about it, I would just leave so impressed. And I remember the last time Rachel and I walking away from that restaurant, and Rachel said, man, if we just had like 100 Ali Raks in the country, like basically in like all the major cities and at least one in every state, like we might be able to end abortion. But it is so important, and it's so not what we teach people to do, but it's still important. And so even though we don't talk about it a lot, it's like, hey, let's bring Ali on and take a quick podcast break from apologetics. And I want you to teach other people who would like to be effective at local advocacy. Teach them what you've learned, what works, what doesn't. So maybe start by just explaining a bit, like an overview of what you do, and then we can dive into the details.
Sure. And just like a note on apologetics, the importance, I think, is for pro-life people to learn apologetics even before they get into this type of work, where you get into the political advocacy, is honestly for your own assurance that you know that you have the best arguments. You may not use them, because that's the thing. In ways that I have to be persuasive is sometimes on activating someone, not necessarily on convincing a legislator what to do. Okay. So, but to know, and also I think to give yourself a little bit of, like I said, of assurance and hope that you're on the right side of things, that you've examined this and that you will not be put off. So someone might come at you with a really, like aggressive opinion, but if you know the tactics on how to like kind of de-escalate that, you also elevate yourself as a trustworthy person. And that's the thing. People have watched me, have conversations and be able to kind of defeat in a moment an argument. And that elevates me in their eyes as an expert. And that's important. You want to follow an expert.
Yes.
So that's number one. That's actually why I still encourage people to be better at apologetics, because I know people have taken over like a Right to Life chapter because they have a personal story, like maybe they're post-abortive or something like that. But they can't, when they kind of come out as a pro-life advocate, their pro-choice friends might start to attack them, and they don't know how to navigate that. So that is why I do say, for everybody.
The stories are important. We need those stories out there because they really connect with people. But just because you have an interesting and important story doesn't make you instantly ready to respond to the violinist argument.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Those are two different things, and both are. But if you've got both, that's a really powerful combination.
Right. And we can come back to that. There's also like, I'm so sorry that you had that bad experience, but you shouldn't take that away from other women. That comes up so often in politics. Okay, so what kinds of things do I do? So I run Charles County Right to Life, which is a county of Maryland. I am an affiliate of Maryland Right to Life, which is an affiliate of National Right to Life. And we are a 501c4. So we are allowed to be political. So we are allowed to be legislative. We are allowed to lobby, and we are allowed to educate. We are not partisan though, so we don't. We're not a PAC. We don't endorse. So the way that we work down here is Maryland Right to Life has a dedicated lobbyist for the Maryland General Assembly, and she will keep an eye on what's coming down the pike, and if we need to support or we need to defeat something. And so what I do is I have my affiliate chapter, which really only, and this is important to know, I only have at any given time, between 10 and maybe 25 active members, meaning they come to my meetings, they'll show up for an event or something like that. But I have an email list of 1,000 and a Facebook presence that we put out the alert and they go to work. So that's the thing that's important that when I actually learned this during our first conference that we had Trent at. And we did have 3 of those conferences, by the way. That that's kind of the story. And then we went statewide last year. We had a statewide conference.
Nice.
But we had Trent in the morning showing people how to apply good arguments. But in the afternoon, we actually had the Maryland Right to Life lobbyists talk about what's effective at lobbying when you're trying to work with a state level legislation and the legislature. And it's funny, but I had no idea what that presentation was going to be about. And yet I actually, don't tell Trent this, but I actually thought that was more gold than what he taught in the morning. And the reason is he was like, we have a playbook. There's a way we do these things. And if we can get everyone behind them, they work every time. And I was like, that's how I work. Like I take those golden nuggets and I'm like, we have to get this into the hands of as many people as we can. So the way that and this is also a plea for people to please get involved in their local and state level legislation, because this is where the magic really is, number one. And number two, if Roe v. Wade were overturned tomorrow, abortion is legal in many states still, in my state included. It is absolutely codified into our state statute. And they've tried for the last 2 years to put it in our state constitution because, and this is Planned Parenthood's playbook, NARAL's playbook. They've published it. This isn't secret. This isn't conspiracy. They have said they are going after the 9 or 10 states where abortion would remain legal with a Roe v. Wade overturn. So you notice they're not as active or effective in what we consider pro-life states. They're actually more active in what we consider pro-choice states. And you saw that in 2018 with the RHA out of New York, in Illinois, and they tried their hand in Maryland. Maryland flies under the radar, by the way. We are one of the most pro-abortion states in the union, but for some reason they never get put on these lists.
Right.
So I actually think that's probably God at work saying like, just keep flying under the radar. Okay, you guys are doing a good thing. So anyway, the way that it works is we have a 90-day legislative session. Everybody needs to know how their state legislature works. And some state legislatures go all year round. They're always in session or they have sessions throughout the year. And some are only in session a portion of the year. And that's the case in my state. From, I believe it's like the second Wednesday in January for a straight 90 days. That is when all legislation gets passed. And because of this system, it is like breakneck speed for legislators to try to make their mark. Okay. So they will introduce like 10,000 pieces of legislation, and it's like whether we actually need that many new laws or not.
And because there's so many, they go to committees. And this is the way that a lot of state legislatures work. So that's why I'm talking about it. It is applicable.
Yeah.
Almost every state, I think, does use a committee structure of some sort. Well, the secret, that's not so secret, is you kill legislation or you pass legislation in that committee, because there are so many bills that get brought forward throughout a year, a session or whatever, that once it makes it out of committee, it's been referred out by what's supposed to be a panel of experts. It goes to the floor, and unless it's really controversial, it passes almost unanimously. So it's like you only have the chance to really be effective with a small number of advocates in that committee structure. So
Interesting.
A bill gets, referred and it's reading, and then it gets assigned to a committee. And so our strategies are, if you're a legislator, if my representative is not on that committee or not a bill co-sponsor, they do not care what my opinion is about that bill. They can put me off. They can say it hasn't made it out of that committee.
Right.
If it goes to a floor vote, then I'll take your opinion into account.
Right.
So the trick is you have to get to the committee members, okay? And me contacting a legislator from, Anne Arundel County is going to be somewhat effective if I'm just, John Q. Public, but way more effective if I can get Anne Arundel residents to call en masse, to that legislator. So that's kind of how it works. We try to hit really hard when it's in committee, when it's being first read. And we also pressure the bill co-sponsors to withdraw. That is where we try to be, to the point. We try to use, effective language. We try not to be emotional. And this is another place where pro-life apologetics helps you to kind of evaluate, are you making a good argument here? Or are you, just, because legislators, honestly, they don't care about religious arguments. They do care, though, about personal stories. So you can have an emotional appeal, but they want personal anecdotes. They want to know how you are going to be personally affected by a bill passing or failing. So these are the sorts of things that we do. And this is how we work in conjunction with state level lobbyists. They'll put out the call, we go to work. And so I will, just for example, I'm going to use our most successful example, which was physician-assisted suicide. Okay. The fight in this state, I think, began around 2014 or 2015. Compassion and Choices is usually the lead group behind any press for a physician-assisted suicide bill in any state. And they've been successful in a few states, but it's still not popular legislation. Just so if anybody's listening and they really want to know how to defeat it in their state or they hear it's coming, it's not popular with people. It fails when it becomes a ballot initiative. So that's why they try to get it in as state level legislation, because you can more easily convince 10 people in a committee than you can 140 person, assembly. So they started in 2015, 2016. It was it was killed in committee. They took a break in I think it was 2018. They took a break because it was an election year. And then they brought it back in 2019. I may have the dates wrong, but what you need to know is that they tried 4 times before it got to a floor vote. And the statistics have shown that Compassion and Choices will try 7 times in your state before they abandon it. So we've got a few more to go. But in 2018, this was where it was critical. They got it passed in the House. And they did that through political maneuvering because it affected both health policy and judicial policy, because physician-assisted suicide is actually illegal according to old statute. They wanted to replace that. So they had 2 committees reviewing the bill. And the chair, who was a co-sponsor for the bill, actually I believe the lead sponsor of the bill, she actually combined the 2 committees so that the vote would be one committee. Whereas previous votes, it had split. And if one committee failed to refer the bill out, then it dies. So the Judiciary Committee doesn't like that bill. They keep voting it down, but the Health Policy, Committee would vote it out. So we had control in both. We actually had a legislator from our district in both aspects of the bill, both on the House side and the Senate side.
Wow.
We had a legislator on the Judiciary Committee for the House, which was great. She definitely immediately jumped in anti-PAS. So that's how we worked. We had our role, right? And we did our part in the House. But it did make it out of committee, and it was voted through like by 4 votes on the House. It was a very contentious bill, and the Speaker of the House had gone around calling favors. So it was hard.
Wow.
But then we had to turn to the Senate. So our legislator, our state senator, was a co-sponsor of the bill. He was a freshman senator. He was putting his name on pretty much anything he could, so he could show that he was a team player, right? So we got the alert very early that he was a co-sponsor, and we started working. And again, we did not make anything up. This was a playbook that had already been written. And what was amazing was years ago when the bill was first introduced, one of our delegates on the House side co-sponsored, and we used the exact same techniques as they used to flip him, okay?
Oh, interesting.
So we went to our senator. First of all, we started with emails, okay? And we flooded him with emails. And the biggest, here's Allie's tip number 1. This is so important to understand. Volume, 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 okay? You can write the most persuasive email. If it's the only email they read, they're going to say, well, only one person opposed the bill, okay? But if they get 1,000, they know that that's a representative of like 10 or 20,000 people's opinions, even if it's not really. But if you can convince 1,000 people to write emails, they're going to go, holy cow.
Right.
So it's about volume. It's about their chiefs of staff having to go through that email and delete, and take a tally, right?
Right.
So it was heavy on the email. Second, we started phone calls. We started calling his office, pressing him for, and of course, at first they say, well, where are you calling from? We'll take it into account. The next step is you have to go in person. You have to go and get FaceTime with a legislator and let them know that you're watching. And the biggest thing is most people don't do this. So it's really effective if you go, because it's like someone cares so much to drive up here and pull me out of a committee or come to my office. So that is, again, the playbook we were given by Maryland Right to Life. This is what you have to do. So we went to an organized lobbying night. And, we knew where he was going to be. We had called ahead to his chief of staff. His chief of staff actually pulled him out of a committee. And I just want also people to know that when you meet me, I'm very I know what I'm talking about. I'm very impressive, but I am terrified on the inside when I have to actually defend my views with someone I know who doesn't agree with me. So I want you to know that is very natural and normal.
And all of us feel some of that.
All of us feel that,
I'm sure there are some that are very, very bulldogs and ready to go. But I know a lot of people that do campus outreach, and I would count myself as one that, this is I don't like fighting or arguing with people. I'm nervous, and that's just normal. It's okay.
Yeah. So it's I had, notes written out, and it was really funny. There's probably 20 of us. So that was effective to have about 20 people in front of him. And, my friend Janet had set up the meeting, and she was like, we know your time's really valuable. So we've all designated a spokesperson, and it's Ali, and here she goes.
That's smart.
So
because now you really do represent everyone else here.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So, and also to know that physician-assisted suicide, there are certain arguments that are more persuasive than others. And, for this one, a lot of people who are anti-abortion pro-life are actually pro-physician-assisted suicide, because in their view, this is my choice for my own body, right? But why we fight so hard against it is that physician-assisted suicide affects the healthcare of other vulnerable people, because it starts to diminish the view of the elderly, the ill, and the disabled, so that once it's legalized in a state, the value on their healthcare in their life goes down. So when they do hit points in their life when they want to fight against a disease, fight against a disability, or they're elderly and, they're starting to hit dementia, but they want to live, and they want to be cared for, then they start to get pressure to take the drugs. So that's who we're fighting for. And so that was the thing when our senator came out, and we said first of all, I did not go in on that, that one. I also knew a little bit about our senator. He homeschooled his children, and I homeschool my children. So this is like that relational apologetics that you talk about. And so what I started with was things to thank him for. So,
Awesome.
I started the conversation by saying, we're here. I was with a Catholic lobbying group at the time when they had a few things they wanted us to talk about. And so I saved physician-assisted suicide for the end. And I said, we've got this fetal homicide bill coming through from the judicial side. We'd really appreciate a yes vote on that because that acknowledges the value of pregnant women who are victims of crimes. There's some Catholic school boost scholarships that are going to go through in the budget, and those help, the vulnerable and the low income families to have better school choice. And I also said, I'm sorry, I'm actually speeding ahead. I started off by saying, when he came out, I said, sir, I met your daughter on election night. She was electioneering outside of the polling place that I go to. What a credit to your and your wife's legacy to have such a well-spoken young woman to represent you. Oh my gosh, he loved that. And then I said, and I understand that she was homeschooled. I homeschool my own children. And that was just like, he goes, I'm a big fan of homeschooling. And then of course, because he's a Democrat, he goes, all schools are great. Right. So that's actually what I led in with. So I let him know that I do know a little bit about him. And then I think that he's a good person. I think that he's done a good job. So you don't ever want to go in and be like, you're horrible. Everything you stand for is awful, but please change your mind for me. You know what I mean? Right. So that's when I did the fetal homicide and the boost scholarships. And then I said, and also, sir, we'd really like you. We understand that you've co-sponsored this legislation for aid in dying, and we would really like you to withdraw your name from sponsorship on that bill and vote no ultimately if it comes to the floor. I made no arguments, but he just smiled and said, well, any amendments that I could offer? You know what I mean? Because that's what they're trained to do too. Like, well, we'll just amend it and make it more palatable. Right. And it's funny, it kind of caught me off guard, but this is where I went into unscripted. And this is where the adrenaline hit. I said, no. And he was like, he and his chief of staff were like, no. And I said, sir.
It's so bad.
I go, sir, what you cannot amend are the unintended consequences of this bill, that the healthcare and the value of human life for the elderly, ill, and disabled will absolutely be in jeopardy if a bill like this goes through. And we just can't, we really cannot have that in our state. So it was like, okay. And his chief of staff was, she's taking her notes.
Down. It's so good. Just real quick, I just want to highlight there's a really, really great word that you used in that, which was unintentional. You're not blaming him. You purposely wrote this bill that's going to have all these terrible effects. You're like, no. Like, I get, what's at least implied, that the subtext is, I get you. I know you're trying to help.
Yes.
But there's this other thing that kind of just naturally happens. And we've seen this in other states or the Netherlands, where this will happen. And there is no amendment that you can do that's just going to fix all that or protect from all that.
Right. And you do have to examine your arguments when it comes to legislation, because if you make an argument that something could be amended, if you one of the things they used to attack was that, well, it only makes you go through one doctor. One doctor is the only person, so it's like you can doctor shop. So what they do, and when they legalized it in DC, they just added another doctor. Okay, you have to see two doctors. Boom, then it passed. So it's like, well, obviously that's a failing argument, you know. So we did that, but we didn't stop there. We actually did not stop with just that face to face. We followed up. You know what I mean? We started pressing him for the answer we wanted. It wasn't
emails,
just
emails, with calls. How are you following up?
All of it, emails and calls. And we also were working, our lobbyists would stop back in. Do you know what I mean? So it was a team effort, but, when it came down to it and they're starting, the lobbyists, they have their count. They walk around and they start to get people to confirm. So, it was seriously, if you could write a movie on how I think people would watch it and be excited, because what happened was I got a call from the executive director of Maryland Right to Life on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. I was about to have my afternoon coffee. My kids were napping, I was like, and he was like, Ali, we've got 24 hours. They were supposed to vote today on the second reading, and the Senate president has allowed them 24 more hours. He's like, we're targeting the Senate president and we're targeting your senator,
Right.
because they knew. So, prior to that, they actually did. The Senate committee had to go back and re-examine the bill because they knew they were going to be pressured to vote on it, right? So in that committee hearing where they went and re-examined, our senator withdrew his name from the co-sponsorship.
He did?
Yeah, so that was step number 1.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, so they actually, the advocates for this bill, our allies in the committee, offered something like 30 amendments. And my friend who's a lobbyist laughed so hard, like internally, because she, when it was like, and we have this amendment, Senator Ellis wants his name off the bill. It's like, she was like, yes,
Do you have any idea why he took his name off the bill? Like, was it something like where like he wasn't that passionate about it? He was just trying to get his name on a bunch of bills?
We asked him to. Yeah, I think it's because we asked him to. That's
Really?
the thing. Yeah, I think he did not give us a definite that he would vote no. But he did withdraw his name because he did kind of mention, we never got, I think, total confirmation, but he had said in other conversations that, we asked him not to sponsor it. So that is, and that's important too, even if you fail on a measure, but if you can get someone to withdraw their support, and then it's on the other counties, what I mean? You can't save the whole state by yourself, but that was a huge one. So, but when it came down to those final 24 hours, we were hitting 3 contacts. We were hitting the Senate president, who was not in our district, but the next one over. So I did have some sphere of influence there, but we were calling him directly. Mm-hmm. The governor, because we wanted him to secure a veto if it did go through, and our senator. So I put out the alert. And, it was like call. At this point, it's calling. And so we called, and I believe it was about 8 p.m. the night before the vote. I got word from someone who had called that he had, he was indicating to callers that he would vote no the next day. Wow. So it's like, okay, there we go. We've done our part. And so when it came down to the reading, and this is what's incredible, it goes through a first reading and in committee. It goes to a second reading. They actually vote on whether to go to a third reading. And what happened was they knew they had the vote count that day. Mm-hmm. And so they said, we're going to do something unprecedented. We're going to vote this up or down on this second reading. And I was in the car, like I was listening to this. I'm like, and I was on the way to the church. So it was like, the vote tally, it was like, okay, we're calling the vote. Boom, they pressed their little buttons. It came out 23-23, 1 abstention, and it died on a tie.
Wow.
So it was like,
what about the co-sponsor? How did the co-sponsor vote?
He voted no.
The original co-sponsor. So he voted no in the end.
Oh, yeah. Our senator, he voted no in the end. And the Senate president voted no as well. So everyone we called, we secured that. But what is incredible is the story, like if you look this, you can actually look this up on EWTN. They did a story on it. And the story for them is the one senator who abstained. Yeah. I guess like 20 years ago, he was a senator too when they tried this the first time, and he abstained. He said, I've heard both sides of the argument. I cannot make a good decision. So I will, I can't make one that's going to please. I'm not swayed, so I'm not voting. So he voted no, so that became the story. Like his abstention is what killed the bill. But I mean, think about it. If our senator, who was a co-sponsor, had voted yes, it would be over. So that's kind of a story to show you that it's like, it comes down to one person a lot,
That is so helpful to have that, because now I've got like 10 questions I need to ask you. And then that'll probably take us to the end of the episode. Okay, let's talk a little bit about emails. Yeah. I've always wondered, again, as someone who doesn't understand how this really works, I sometimes joke, I don't know what is more accurate, West Wing or House of Cards. I don't know how this whole system works, okay?
Yeah.
I'm glad there are cool people like you that do, and I'm kind of glad I'm not one of them. And so the emails, like a lot of times people like you, I would assume, but I know, or people who do similar things will send out kind of like, I want you to email your senator or whatever. Here's like a template. Here's like, if you don't know how to write it, here's a couple of paragraphs. Feel free to tweak it if you want. And I've always wondered if the senator gets like 100 emails that are 90% the same email, like it's pretty obvious to whoever is actually reading them that it's, this has come from a lobby organization or whatever,
Right.
does that decrease their effectiveness? Is it still okay to use templates? What is your take on that?
This is such a good question because I've actually evolved on this.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I used to really say that it has to be a unique email and it has to come from, the heart, like use my talking points, but please don't copy and paste is always what I would tell my people. I actually think there's value in both, but I actually think it depends on when in the process you're sending these emails as to which one it needs to be. Okay. So in the beginning, when you kind of gotten wind of something and you want to nip it in the bud, you want to get out early and you want to let your legislators know that it is a bad idea to support this effort, then I think personal emails that are written by you are going to be effective because they're going to see that organically. Yeah. There's a group of people that this is not, there's not really, and especially if they don't see any support for it, then they'll go, oh, maybe this isn't the route we want to go down. So I actually think it's like early in session, I really say like, please don't copy my email. Here's a template.
Right.
But I've actually gotten away from, too many like exemplars because people will just copy and paste it and they'll change like two words to just like bulleted talking points. And I'll say, and this is what makes an effective email. Here's like huge tip number 2.
Okay.
What makes an effective email is you're always gracious to start when in the greeting of your email. If there's something you can praise the legislator or the city councilman or whoever you're contacting, if you can praise them for it first, and starts out really, really well. So, for our senator for 2020, it was like, thank you for voting no on this piece, last year. I hope that we can convince you to remain a no vote, something like that. So start with something gracious, or, if they raised money for like kids softball or something, whatever it is. Then you say while you're writing, I'm writing to ask you, and you tell them specifically, like, I want you to withdraw your sponsorship. I want you to vote no on this. I want you to convince your colleagues to vote no on this, whatever it is, and then reference the bill. Then you want to tell a story. Facts tell, but stories sell. There was a business person that I used to follow. That was like her mantra. Facts tell and stories sell. You actually want to give some sort of anecdotal while you're wrapping in the facts, right? So for physician-assisted suicide, you're going to want to say that maybe you've been there with someone at the end of life. And like my grandmother, I often use her story. She was cared for by her own children until the end. And that allowed her 10 years to know compassion, love, and support rather than, being a burden on someone else. Because that is one of the reasons people request physician suicide. They feel that they're a burden. And you make it personal. You make it anecdotal while you're wrapping in some of those lobbying points. Okay. And then I like to keep mine short and sweet, to be honest. I don't like nobody can read long emails like this. Right. So I do try to get right to the point, tell my little story, and then, thank you so much for your time. And, please let me know how you're going to vote. Usually do ask them to respond to you. So that's, I think early in the process, that is the best way to go. When it's down to like the final 24 hours, it's all about volume. They are not going to read a personal email. So at that point, like those voter voice ones, those pre-templates that you get, I've recently in a non-pro-life grassroots campaign that I've been running since May, I have been using an actual advocacy platform. Right. I write the email. Right. So I do know it's well written, but then I tell everybody, it's volume, share. So that's in the last, 24 hours, 48 hours, it's all about, they got to know how many people stand opposed. So with that, if it's a template email, it's fine. They're just counting them anyway. Right. So it's like, okay. And they will, they'll record your name and your zip code and all that. Cause a lot of times they'll give you a response, thank you for contacting me. Bill, this is how it ended up, that sort of thing. Right. So that's where I feel about emails. Okay. I think early in the process, personal, later in the process, volume.
One more question about emails. So speaking of volume, do you have any sense of what the threshold is? Like, when you want them to get a bunch of emails, they give them, like you used the word 1,000 earlier, you're like, if they get 1,000 emails, then they know that might mean 10 or 20,000 people in their constituency. Is there some I feel like I have I'm 90% sure I heard someone one time say, a lot of times with local politicians, like 10 emails is enough. Like that's significant because people don't do that. Like they're not as active as they used to be. I don't know if that's true or if that's just a false memory. But I just wonder, is there like a threshold like 50? Once you get to 50, you make a much bigger impact than at 45. Or is it like hundreds or is it 1,000? You have any idea?
Honestly, Josh, I do not have an idea. I am the kind of person that won't stop. Like if you
true.
only did 10 emails, I would be disgusted, and I'd be like calling people. I'd be like, where's your email to the senator?
What is wrong with you?
So because I don't know how many people actually, when I send out an alert and I ask them to to just write their own, I can't track that. And I do trust that a lot of people are doing it. But when I started using the advocacy platform, like form emails, I could look. And I have to say, for instance, I've been doing this grassroots campaign since May, where it's for our reopening. Our county, the first time that the governor opened us, didn't follow the governor. They decided to delay us 2 weeks. So I employed all these same grassroots techniques. And we hammered them: phone calls, emails, social media, everything. And they didn't reverse course, but ever since then, they have voted with the governor.
Interesting.
We just had a vote yesterday. I had about 8 hours to notice, and we had 250 emails go to that, to the okay. Now, in a similar grassroots campaign on a controversial issue, they have been working to defeat in our county for years now. When they kind of get the alert out to people that are in their network, I've seen they have fewer than 50 open comments come to them. So I look at that. I look at, okay, with this campaign, we've had hundreds and we have a lot of success in getting them to vote the way we want. But in this other campaign, they still can't budge, and they're getting at most 40, 45.
Yeah.
Then they're not quite moved by that, So I really think it probably is going to depend on the issue, to be quite honest. But I always go for 1,000. I'm always we got to do 1,000, you guys. Who knows how many are really happening,
Do you have any other tips for calling a committee member or meeting with a committee member? What have you learned? What are some of the do's and don'ts of doing that?
So I think what you need to know is that you're generally not going to talk to the legislator.
That's
important. They don't answer their own phone. It's always going to be an aide or the chief of staff. I have only heard, in my experience, one time that someone actually stayed on the phone long enough to have to defend their beliefs. And I wasn't there and present. So it could have just been this particular person wanted to have a further discussion. Yeah. But generally they are very nice. Okay. So this is nice. They even if they do not respect the position that you hold, they know that you are a constituent and they are not going to be nasty to you. Yeah. So that's the biggest thing is take a deep breath. I mean, I'm someone who doesn't even like to call for pizza. So if I had to call a legislator, I am nervous as all get out. But also remember that they don't have a lot of time either. So basically just get to the point. Hi, I'm calling from, your area, your town, your county, or whatever. I would like the senator, delegate, representative, councilman, whatever, to please vote no on X, right? And they may say, okay, and they may ask you for a little bit more information, like they may ask you for a phone number or a zip code. Because honestly, I could activate someone that I know in California to just call, but those are fake calls. You know what I mean? Don't do that kind of stuff.
It's not relevant to that.
No, honestly, if they see 50 calls from out of state, they're going to be like, this is such a joke. This isn't even, so be authentic, call from Maryland, I'm in Maryland, call Maryland. So they may take your zip code or your name because they're going to check to see if you're really a constituent. But they're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Okay. And they actually may want to send you a letter afterwards. Mm-hmm. So don't be creepy and weird and be like, what do you need that for?
Right. So, you're a constituent. This is how this works.
Yes. And it is good to be known to your legislators. Even if they don't agree with you, it's really important that they know you. And if you can go to their in-person events, like their fundraisers and stuff like that, so that they get to know you, they start to think about you when they're introducing legislation. I actually had a chief of staff for a delegate who she was a co-sponsor for the abortion amendment that we ultimately got them to withdraw. And her chief of staff, I think, watches me on social media because I I came into the office like with my crew for Life Day this year, and she was like, "Hi, Ellie." And I'm like, "Oh, hey, Melissa. I guess we're friends." You know,
That's a little creepy. It's like, you recognize me from Facebook, huh?
Well, she recognized me from the year before, but I'm just saying, yes.
Still.
But we'd had a very brief interaction. I'm like, if you remember me by my first name, I think you've been watching me, you know? So anyway, but she said something like, well, we've got some bills this year that you may be interested in.
Wow.
So yeah, so it was like she was working on some like food security for college students or something like that. And it's like, yeah. And that's the other thing. I'm like, heck yeah. Anything we can support
Common
that's
ground.
not, you know,
Common
anti-life.
values.
Sure, exactly. So so that is when you're calling, you know, it's just like, here's my name, here's my address. I want them to vote no. And a lot of times they're literally just taking a tally and you're off the phone in 30 seconds. So the biggest thing is just make the call. Just do it.
So first of all, does he recognize you? I see that's a badge of honor. He's like, oh, there's Ali the jackhammer Rak, you know, coming through here. But secondly, okay, so this is so interesting to me. So you're saying that usually when you call your politician to try to get them to vote yay or nay on a thing, you usually don't even give any reasons. You're literally saying, I want this person to vote no on this bill, and that might be all the information
that
they're asked for. They might be asked for an address or a zip code or something, but they are not very often being asked, well, tell me what are your like top three reasons you don't like assisted suicide or whatever.
This may be a timing thing. Like if you make a phone call early, they're probably gonna ask you why you're calling. You know what I mean?
Because they're more exploring the issue at this point.
Yep.
Oh,
yeah. Let me give you an example from this year.
Yeah.
We got an early alert that our senator, the same one who had we had gone round and round with on PAS, he was the sole sponsor on a doula bill for Medicaid. Which on its face looks really great. Like who wouldn't want support for laboring women, right? Especially low-income women.
Yeah.
But the reason we got the alert was we were pretty sure that it was NARAL who had requested the implementation because doulas in Medicaid programs is one of their issues because they want abortion doulas to be able to be paid for.
We saw this in California. Yeah.
Yes. And what's important to know is that if they can get something passed, once it's passed, it will be expanded. So that's the thing is it may look pretty benign now, but they'll use it later we just want to amend it and add abortion. Right. So we called the senator, and honestly, he didn't realize that whoever had asked him to sponsor this legislation was in fact from NARAL. It was an early alert, and so we were doing the personal emails. Well, my friend has personal experience with a Medicaid doula who was there and paid for by the state of Massachusetts for the birth mother of her adopted child, who she got to be there in the room with, you know. Right. So she had an incredibly positive experience with Medicaid doulas. Okay. And she called up she got the alert and she was texting me within 10 minutes saying, I got to call you. I just spoke with the senator's office. And she said to him, I believe that this is a good bill. But if you do not amend it to specifically exclude abortion services, this will be used for this. And that is antithetical to life and pregnancy and birth and all that. Yeah. And this is how effective that was. Okay. So she had a reason to call and she had very compelling talking points. She was asked to testify for the bill.
Wow.
And she negotiated within 30 seconds, only if you exclude abortion services. And they said, sure. So boom, she becomes an expert witness for their testimony and negotiates, what she wants, which is to exclude this. Now that bill ultimately, like the chair had no interest. The chair of the committee had no interest in advancing it. So poor guy, he got to basically like read the written statements, I think, but they tabled it. But that's good because now we told him when we saw him about a month later and we use this as thank you so much for that bill and for standing with us. And we will help you write that bill next year so that it is strong and we'll help you pass it. Okay. Oh. So that was the other thing. You know what I mean? It's a trade-off of, we'll activate our network to pass that. What a pro-life win to get doulas in the Medicaid program. Well, in that process, we actually found out that he's kind of pro-life. So we didn't know if we were just effective at the lobbying, but his legislative director is pro-life. When we went and met her, she kind of was a little like, a little icy with us. And then she goes, my mom was just like you people. She went down to that march in DC every year. And she's like, and then I got into like Ali mode where I was like, and did you know the Medicaid program pays for, for abortions? And she was like, oh, that's just so wrong. It's so wrong. I'm like, yeah, it is. So now it's like, okay, we've got it. Now we have this coalition. Yes, absolutely. So, that's what happens when you get engaged. Look at that. I mean, it was work, but it was easy. It was simple to find all that stuff out and use it,
Okay, I want to ask you about something I felt like I heard you say earlier, at least really quickly, and I think I know what you meant, but I want to expand on it. And this is the question that might tweak some pro-lifers, but that's something that happens sometimes on this podcast. I feel like I heard you say something about when you're having the actual conversations, not in the emails, about not being too emotional. I obviously, if you're telling a story, that there's something there, but I'm gonna guess, as someone who's basically never lobbied, that it is possible to be a bit too much in front of them, be a little bit too emotional or aggressive or something like that. Yet, obviously, you and I both know abortion is this horrible thing. It's this huge human rights injustice, and we kind of feel like a sort of like slavery is going on, and we really want to stop it, and we should be passionate, we should be angry, and we should be emotional, like all those things. I was just in an email exchange, I think maybe today or yesterday or something, with someone who was kind of asking me. She's like, I don't know how to not be super emotional when I'm talking to people about abortion. And I think she was recognizing, like, I think this is hampering my effectiveness a little bit. I need to work on that. So we're talking about that. So I would love for you to talk to people a little bit about what you've observed about that. Yeah. And if my inclinations are close to correct, can you answer the pro-lifers that are kind of like, but Josh, how dare you? What are you talking about? Not being too emotional. Like that whole thing.
Yeah. I know that because I've seen it. I'm in the pro-life groups. Like you can find me if you're in Elijah's group.
You've seen the comments.
Yeah. And people have come at me like, now you're equating human beings with acorns and that's wrong. And I'm like, I'm not. I'm drawing an analogy. Stop, So when I say don't be emotional, I kind of mean like don't be hysterical. Okay. Don't be, aggressive. Use the right word. You don't want to come back like, how dare you? Right. That's not going to work, because even if the person might have been open to your opinions, they don't like you right now. You're being a jerk, So but do be emotional in a way where if you're giving your testimony and someone has chills all over their body, you're being effective. You are relaying the exact amount of emotion. I have a friend who's a sidewalk counselor. I asked her to come testify on the abortion amendment that we had passed. She has an incredible story. She has probably hundreds of incredible stories because she's a very effective sidewalk counselor. She's post-abortive. She's a mom of rape, but she didn't choose even to tell her story. She told the story of a refugee who had been trafficked and had a fetal, fatal fetal diagnosis. And that's why she met her at the abortion clinic, because her human trafficker had $600 in the car. And the medical clinic down the street wanted $2,500 for an ultrasound, And it was like, but the community came together and gave that woman the hope and the counseling and the resources to carry her baby to term, to have him baptized. She was Catholic and that was important to her. And then they fundraised and got this incredible headstone and memorial for this little saint who lived just 20 minutes. And if you can tell that story and people have chills all over their body, that is an effective use of emotion when talking with a legislator or talking with anyone really who you need to change their mind. But what it is it's the conviction behind the emotion, not just the hysteria that this is really bad, But what was the point of that story is, what was the better outcome for that woman, that she got to grieve her child. Yeah. She got to hold him as he passed. Yeah. She didn't have to succumb to, a bloody, painful procedure that would have left her an empty womb and would have put her back into the arms of her trafficker.
Right. That was going to be my follow-up was, were they able to kind of get her out of the situation with the trafficker?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's a great, I mean, you could probably look that story up too.
So tell me about your alerts. So you've got an email list of about 1,000 people. do you just kind of email like one thing, like you've got one action, like here's one thing I want you to do? Or, I mean, just talk a little bit about how you're doing that. Again, for the future Ali Raks who are going to go be awesome in Illinois or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing there?
So I actually did a lot. I do a lot of studying, not just in the pro-life movement, because you don't want to be too much in an echo chamber.
Yes.
But I look at, and I think you did similar, like when you were starting ERA, you studied business and you studied marketing.
Yep.
Well, I did something similar because I want to understand how you activate people, and that's different than just having a good pro-life argument.
Yeah.
And so the secrets of marketing persuasion are actually not in the arguments you make. It's usually in the way you lay it out, where you make it, like, why are we so convinced by sales copy? And it's like, oh my gosh, I need this $50 program, like click add to cart.
Yeah.
So I actually employ some of those same marketing tactics when I'm sending out an alert. So it's like, I usually start with like a hook, like, an alert came in, subject line is urgent action needed, that sort of thing. And something that I studied when I was studying like secrets of persuasion and like neuromarketing was mental availability. If people have to work to send the email or make the phone call, they will put it off. Oh, I don't really have that time right now. Mm-hmm. So in the email, I always put a hyperlink to the legislator's phone number and email. So it's like if they're reading it on their smartphone, it's just their thumb has to click it, So, and that is also why those like voter voice templates and stuff, they are effective because people will just,
they actually end up there. They end up in the inbox.
They'll actually do it. Right. Exactly. So, mental availability, I make it very easy for them to take action. And I also say, this will only take you 30 seconds. 30 seconds could save a life. I say stuff like that. So that is, and then when it comes to phone calls, also, I don't just send the email and that's done. Okay. I am on my own email list. So when it comes into my email box from my personal email, I then forward it to like as many people as I can. And I always say forward to 50. That's like my big thing. Forward to 50. Because everybody, 50 people in your state. You may think like it's like 50 is a lot of people. 50 people. You probably know 150. But if you can think of at that moment 50 people you could forward this to and ask them to forward it to 50 people, then it's like even if they only forward it to 10 or only 10 people open it, that's a lot more than if you had never followed up to make sure that it went out, right? So I'll say, please see my email below and take action as soon as possible. And I always give them a timeline. You always say, this needs to be done in 24 hours or we're going to miss the ball. They're going to have the committee meeting or whatever. So, so forwarding and giving them a timeline and making it very, very easy for them to take action, mental availability. So then I'll usually get on Facebook Messenger and I start messaging people individually. Hey, there's this horrible legislation coming. Like, could you take 10 seconds to fill this out and then forward it? Yeah. And they're always like, oh yeah, of course, done. And then when we had that physician assisted suicide, in that last 24 hours, when it was all about phone calls and because emails were going to be completely ineffective at that point, I took to my own cell phone and I came up with like a little text message that people could then forward, and it had the phone numbers for each of the people who wanted to call. And, I said, there's a vote tomorrow. We have less than 24 hours. We're targeting the Senate president, the governor and Ellis, like, please do this right away. And that was a thing. When that goes to someone's phone, I mean, is there any excuse not to call when the number is literally there and you can just click on it? So those are the effective things that I find is like, don't just think, oh, well, I sent him an email that it's going to be done. You have to follow up. And I think forward, share.
You're taking away as many barriers as you can. You're taking that extra time. You're doing the work of making the links and all that stuff.
Yes.
And that's going out. I also think the thing about letting them know, here's how long this will take, is so smart.
Oh my gosh, yes.
We've got them on all the blog posts now. We went back where it's like, this is a 6-minute long article. This is a 10-minute long article. Just like, I think we talked about this with the guy from Tangle. Isaac Saul, who's so interesting, but it's like, I love how his emails start with, okay, this one's going to take 8 minutes. And it's just like, okay, you just kind of make that, you commit, okay, I've got 8 minutes. Okay, I will do this.
Yeah.
And that, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Okay, what are the most common mistakes that you see people like you make when they're either trying to help other people to lobby or maybe just when people are following, like supposed to be following your directions, but maybe they do it ineffectively?
Yeah. So don't take for granted that you have been clear. or that like your first explanation of something means you're going to replicate exactly what you do in somebody else. I have seen this time and time again. I've seen people say like, do not use Jesus Christ as a lobbying point against physician-assisted suicide. And then when pressured, people will say, well, why do you oppose the bill? And they'll be like, God is the ultimate decider of when your life ends. And it's like, we just told you, like, we have atheist legislators, like, so, so it's like practice, like have people practice and do it over and over. But also you do have to relinquish control. You do have to realize that people are going to, they're going to say something ineffective or they're going to go off script, and try not to be like freak out about that. It's like, okay, if you've got 100 people that get up there and speak and like 2 of them kind of are kind of duds, they're still going to see that 100 people were ready for the fight. This happened this last year. Oh my gosh, it was literally 2 days before all the coronavirus shutdowns. It ended our session early, but was the hearing for what was we ultimately knew was going to be the amendment that they were going to expand abortion services under. They did it really sneaky that it actually made it a data privacy bill, but it was lock stock, like the same exact bill that they had used in Florida in the 80s. I mean, almost word for word. That ended up defeating some of their minor consent and stuff like this bill. It was, court precedent. Well, our lobbyist for Maryland Right to Life she's so great. She's amazing. And she had this huge coalition. We had Gabriel Network. We had all the pregnancy centers. We had Americans United for Life. We had ACLJ, Democrats for Life. All these people showed up, like 75 people in blue shirts, ready. And the bill sponsor actually pulled the bill because she only had like 2 experts ready to, testify. And she wasn't going to put her bill through this circus. You know what I mean? Like she was just and she tried to convince us that it wasn't about abortion. We were like, sure, it's not. But her chief of staff was like, see you next year. And we're like, we'll be ready.
Yes, you will. Okay, a couple more questions. How do you keep people motivated? The people that are on the list, the people that you are trying to get to do these things that are scary, especially for people who haven't done it very many times. How do you motivate people?
Okay, so this may go against prevailing wisdom, but I've actually tried to keep people like motivated and super active all year long, thinking that that's actually the thing, right? Because I'm motivated all year long. Like I want to work around the clock to end abortion, but actually kind of not reaching out to my list unless I have something really important to tell them. I think keeps them from unsubscribing.
Yeah.
Because I could send Life News articles and, like rehash other people's content to have like a constant going email list where people unsubscribe because they're sick of being contacted every week, or they can pay attention to like 1 email a month that I might send or 2 emails a month, so I try to not abuse my list and I only use it for important things. Like if our pregnancy center has a fundraiser or if we have a fundraiser or, so then they just hear from us when it's important. And I think that especially when you want people to jump into action, that's probably the way to do it. And then for year round, I have my monthly chapter meeting. So I keep my, my core group of volunteers, I keep them engaged. And they're the ones that are going to go work for me. You know what I mean? They're going to go get their 25 friends to make phone calls or do an email, that sort of thing. So
you're replicating yourself in those meetings. Oh,
I think the biggest thing is to know that you actually, you don't need an army always on the front lines. Like you need like a good, like core group of people you can always rely on. And then you need like 1,000 people behind you to just back you up.
So, I just realized something I think that is worth highlighting. Okay. So you're the Maryland Right to Life lobbyists and Maryland Right to Life in general. I'm sure they've got an email list. They're sending alerts out too. But you have your own list that you are using. And you've got other people within your chapter in the same area that have their own lists.
Probably,
and so they're sending emails. And so you might have like, people getting 2 or 3 or 4 emails from different people with like, hey, we really need to get this done.
Oh, yeah.
You're not just relying on Maryland Right to Life to take care of all the email stuff. You've got you're going to do your thing as effectively as you can. Are you using like MailChimp or something? Like, what are you using for this?
I actually use Flocknote. Before that, we used
I've never heard of
Tiny
that.
Letter. Tiny Letter is like this free email list that's from MailChimp that I actually inherited from the person before me.
Okay.
And I hated it because it was like sending a Word document. It was just so I couldn't even put images in it, and they stopped supporting it. So we moved over to Flocknote because all the churches around here use Flocknote. The Archdiocese pays for it, and I use it as I'm an Archdiocesan employee, and I use it here at my parish. And I liked it. I liked that there was text alerts I could use, or also I could make groups, so I could just email really easily. Like just I call them my kitchen cabinet. That's my group that advises me and comes to the meetings. And so I could just email them and not just the whole list, or use my personal email.
Yeah.
And I was going to move over to Constant Contact. And I even actually went and made the subscription, but I went back to Flocknote, and I said, because they have a text to join, which is very nice and seamless, but I wasn't using it, and it was really expensive for my list level. And when I went to cancel, they were like, please, we have such a heart for pro-life groups. What can we? So they cut me a deal. They got rid of the text to join because I wasn't using it anyway, and it cut my subscription in half. So if you need a list service, I highly recommend Flocknote because they are a pro-life company.
Nice.
Yes.
Okay. Last question. You said something super cool earlier that I want to talk about a little bit more. You said you can't save the whole state by yourself.
Right.
I love that. And so there's a clear implication that you guys are partially, some of your effectiveness comes from working well with other pro-lifers in your area, which can be difficult. Pro-lifers can sometimes have a little bit of a hard time working together, but we're getting better, I think.
Turf wars.
It's getting better.
Yeah.
So what are just give me your thoughts and tips for working well with other pro-life groups and being as effective as possible?
Okay, so in the same way that we met because I wanted to get really close to experts, right? I recognized that I was new to leading any sort of movement. I needed to learn from others. I needed to, and I asked the same question of every pro-life advocate I met for like 2 years. Because a lot of the attention's on Students for Life and like campus outreach, and I was like, what can adults do? What can we do? I asked every leader that same question, and so I started to really think and I would just evaluate that's not going to work or this is going to work. So I am a friend to all. That is like my rule. I've definitely been caught in the middle of some turf wars, and I say I'm Switzerland, I'm neutral. If you're going to work with me, I'm going to work with you. So that's the big thing, I think. Coalition building is huge and also amazingly effective. So I sit on the Maryland March for Life Steering Committee with some people from Students for Life, both the Archdiocese of Washington and the Archdiocese of Baltimore, some independent lobbyists, and just really active citizens. And we don't care who gets the credit. I think that's the biggest thing. We like I said, I did 3 local conferences here in my area that I planned with a small committee. And then the 4th year, we took that kind of statewide. And I planned it with Students for Life and Maryland Catholic Conference and, another independent group. And Maryland Right to Life. And it was like, okay, well, who's going to get the list? Who's going to get the signups? Are we going to charge? Are we going to underwrite this? What are we going to do? Because, and we just agreed from the beginning that in the end, as long as that abortion amendment doesn't pass, if physician-assisted suicide doesn't pass, we don't really care who gets the credit. So if you feel like you want to follow Students for Life, then say on their list, they're going to say the same things that we are. They're going to give the same alerts and the same talking points. So that was kind of that's how we run our coalition here in Maryland. It's whatever. And that's the reason why I have my own list, Josh, is because Maryland Right to Life emails may go to your spam folder, but you're looking out for mine, And the other reason why I forward the email again. I'm like, hey, did you see this? is because people they trust me. And so there is a little bit of ego, I guess. There's and it's that relational apologetics and the relational aspect. It's I'm not saying anything different than any other pro-life leader, but people like me. I can be compelling and tell a good story, and I'm a good friend. And I mean, my husband says it all the time, a lot of my good ideas that I put out there, they're really his, but he's just not a salesman, So he'll be like, that was my idea. That was my title. I was like, yeah, but I sold it,
It's what makes you guys a good team.
Yes. Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, you are a joy, and you, I think, are just incredible at what you do. I really do wish there were more Ali Raks. I know that there are more. I know you're not literally the only one who's great at this, but you're the one that I know that is really great at this. And I know that we do need more. And so I would just encourage anyone listening, if you've been trying to figure out your niche in the pro-life movement, maybe this is it. It's not just apologetics. It's not just dialoguing with people. It's not only self-counseling, although those things are really important. We also need people doing exactly what Ali does, but in every state. And so I honor you. You are awesome. There's so many hours that you've put into this that are behind the scenes that no one is paying attention to. No one is thanking you for. I know that exists, and I think you are awesome, and you've made a huge difference in your state, and I am just glad to be friends with you.
Yes,
so
and if any of no problem. Thank you for having me. And if anybody, honestly, I am an open door, and I am open to mentoring or kind of giving advice or any of that. So you can actually reach out to me, Alexandra at charlescountyrightTolife.com. Send me an email, and I am happy to advise.
I will put that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Ali.
Yep.
You're awesome.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Equipped for Life podcast, a project of Equal Rights Institute. Equal Rights Institute uses speaking, writing, YouTube videos, podcasts, online courses, and campus outreach to help pro-life advocates in the areas of practical dialogue tips, relational apologetics, pro-life philosophy, and sidewalk counseling. If you've been helped by this podcast, please consider supporting it by making a donation at equalrightsinstitute.com.